Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight. I'm Adam Jasa. Under pressure at home and abroad, President Donald Trump assured the world in a speech in Davos he will not annex Greenland by force. We'll hear more on Trump's speech from our correspondent at the World Economic Forum in just a moment, but first the other headlines. Thousands flee Kiev after Russian attacks leave the city in the freezing dark. Central European nations split on whether to join Trump's Board of Peace. European Parliament sends the landmark EU-Mercosur deal to court. In a long, unscripted speech to political and business leaders from around the world, President Donald Trump backed down from threats to use force to acquire Greenland. This came after pressure from enraged European allies, prominent Republicans, and a sell-off in US financial markets. Our correspondent Kazimierz Łysiak is in Davos and has the details. Good evening, Kazimierz. What were the key messages from Donald Trump?
Good evening, Adam. This was indeed quite a long speech from US President Donald Trump here at the World Economic Forum, at least more than an hour of talking, and well, he was in typical Trump fashion, jumping from one topic to another, from domestic economy to finally Greenland, the issue that everyone here was anxious about, and this latest feud between Trump administration and Europe. And the big news from here is that Donald Trump finally cleared his position on the United States' potential military action in Greenland. The answer is no.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
So few big sighs of relief from European allies, from everyone gathered here at the World Economic Forum. More than 1,000 people at this hall listening to Trump, but also millions across the world wondering whether that's the end of NATO unity. For now, we know that the United States won't use military force against Greenland, and this comes after a lot of pressure from not only European leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, or Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, but also from Trump's own camp in the United States. I mean, from American lawmakers, not only Democrats, but also Republicans, like Lindsey Graham, for example, saying that this idea of annexing Greenland by force is not a good one, and public perception in the US very much reflecting that, and also markets across the world which reacted negatively to this entire feud and the idea that the United States could attack the autonomous territory of Denmark. This is out of the question. However, there are still big questions hanging above the air here, as US President Donald Trump then went on to say that, well, yes, we want to use force, but we still want Greenland, and we want to commence negotiations on that right now to talk about a potential purchase. He also said, and I quote, you can say yes, and we will be appreciating that, or no, and we will remember it, whatever that means. President Donald Trump also said that he is not so sure that European allies would come to the aid of the United States in the case of any need, seemingly forgetting about all NATO allies reacting after 9/11 and joining American troops in Afghanistan. The only time that NATO Article 5 was invoked, Europe actually answered that call and helped the United States. Thousands of European troops died in Afghanistan, something that Donald Trump seemingly forgot. And now Donald Trump is also still undermining the very idea of NATO, saying that, well, he needs to own Greenland in order to protect it, which is going against the very idea of NATO. Let's listen.
We paid for many years, until I came along, we paid for, in my opinion, 100% of NATO, because they weren't paying their bills. And all we're asking for is to get Greenland including right title and ownership, because you need the ownership to defend it. You can't defend it on a lease. Number one, legally it's not defensible that way, totally. And number two, psychologically, who the hell wants to defend a license agreement?
Kazimierz, thank you for this. But we hear that President Trump also spoke to Polish President Karol Nawrocki on the sidelines of the forum. What came out of this meeting?
Exactly. Polish President Karol Nawrocki has indeed met with US President Donald Trump. We didn't really hear much about the outcome of the meeting, as media weren't allowed to join in on that meeting. However, earlier in the day, Conservative President Karol Nawrocki did say in a meeting, in a panel with Finnish President Alexander Stubb and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, that he understands Trump's approach to Greenland when it comes to the security of the Arctic region. What we can assume, though, is that President Nawrocki also talked with President Trump about the idea from President Trump, the idea for the Board of Peace, this new organization led by Trump, where he is inviting world leaders to join to first solve the conflict in Gaza, but then potentially other conflicts across the world. Polish President Karol Nawrocki was invited, but the matter of him actually signing it at tomorrow's ceremony at 10:30 a.m. here in Davos is still unclear, as President Nawrocki would need the agreement from the Polish Parliament.
Kazimierz, thank you very much for this report. Poland is in two minds about joining the Board of Peace, as we just heard, which President Trump wants to create to handle reconstruction of Gaza and potentially address other conflicts around the world. Several Western European countries are also skeptical, but some Central European nations jumped right in. Anastasia Jaschenko reports.
An invitation for Poland to join Donald Trump's so-called Board of Peace is on the table, but Warsaw is not rushing to decide whether to take part.
In this matter, there must be a joint position of the President and the government. There is too little information to make any firm statement. I personally have a lot of skepticism about this and feel a certain distaste over sitting down with people I don't even want to watch on TV.
The invitation was sent to President Karol Nawrocki, but any decision on joining requires agreement with Prime Minister Donald Tusk and ratification by the Polish Parliament. Nawrocki's advisor says talks have taken place, calling the invitation both an honor and a risk.
Given the significance and serious nature of the matter, it must be approached with a cool head and with full responsibility for the security of the Polish state and global security.
Joining would signal alignment with Trump's vision of a new world order, a view partly shared by President Nawrocki, but it could also distance Poland from some European partners, something Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who maintains close ties across Europe, is keen to avoid.
Politically, it is bad for us to enter into a level of some kind of mega reset with Putin. This is not a document that can be seen today and signed tomorrow.
Invitations to join Trump's initiative have been sent to around 60 countries, including Russia and Belarus. The latter has already accepted. Their policies are widely seen as incompatible with peace, making the idea especially problematic for Poland and most EU members. At the same time, Poland hosts US forces on NATO's eastern flank and relies on American security guarantees, complicating the decision.
They will just simply try to gain as much time as possible to prolong this process and see what happens and see who joins this board and what the approach of the European Union will be.
EU leaders are getting cold feet about joining the Board of Peace. Western countries like France, Sweden and Norway have rejected the invitation in the current form, warning it could rival the UN. Germany, Croatia and Romania, like Poland, are not rushing to join the board, saying they need time to consider the proposal.
This is not a document that can be seen today and signed tomorrow.
We are grateful for the invitation that President Donald Trump has said, and we are on board on continuing to work together on the peace process in the Gaza conflict. This is very important for us. In terms of the wider legal implications here, I think 3-4 days are not enough to assess that.
Hungary, meanwhile, accepted the invitation to Trump's Board of Peace almost immediately. Prime Minister Viktor Orban swiftly confirmed participation, sharing a letter from Trump praising Hungary as a founding member of what he called a one-of-a-kind initiative.
President Trump has invited Hungary to join the Board of Peace as a founding member. We have, of course, accepted this honorable invitation.
Albania and Kosovo have also signaled their support for Trump's initiative and their readiness to join the board. EU leaders are set to discuss Trump's Board of Peace and its implications at an emergency summit on Thursday. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
Poland and other critics of the European Union's landmark trade deal with South America joined forces in the European Parliament to refer it to court, which may delay its implementation. The agreement is seen as beneficial to the European industry, but a powerful farm lobby claims it will kill European agriculture. Our Brussels correspondent Alex Cadier has more.
Well, in a matter of a few hours, the European Parliament made two momentous decisions. The first was to send the Mercosur trade agreement with South American countries to the European Court of Justice to review if it is in line with European Union treaties. What does that mean in practice? That the court will see if it is, as I said, in line with those treaties. That process can take up to 2 years. This trade deal, 25 years in the making, may be further delayed. That leaves Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission with a decision to make. Do they carry on with the deal, rolling it out provisionally while the court makes its assessment? That will go against what the Commission has said to MEPs in the past, but the spokesperson of Ursula von der Leyen's own EPP group in the Parliament has said ignore the decision of the Parliament in the last few hours and push on with the deal. Same message from the German Chancellor.
The European Parliament's decision on the Mercosur agreement is regrettable. It misjudges the geopolitical situation. We are convinced of the agreement's legality. No more delays. The agreement must now be applied provisionally.
So as the European Union delays open trade with these South American countries, the other decision from the European Parliament is to suspend work on the ratification of the EU-US trade deal agreed in Scotland just a few months ago with Ursula von der Leyen and Donald Trump. That, of course, in response to the threats made by the US president when it comes to tariffing those European countries who do not let him acquire Greenland. It is one of those days in the European Parliament where enormous decisions were made in a matter of hours, suspending a free trade deal with the US and delaying a potential free trade deal with the European Union and South American countries. This may have consequences for weeks, if not months to come. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
While the world nervously watched Donald Trump's latest verbal salvos over Greenland and European ingratitude, thousands of Ukrainians were forced to flee their homes in the capital, Kyiv, after relentless Russian attacks plunged much of the country into darkness and biting cold. Oskar Terji reports from Kyiv.
More than 500,000 people have left Kyiv in recent weeks as Russia's winter bombardment of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has created a humanitarian crisis in the Ukrainian capital. With Ukraine experiencing its coldest winter in decades, Russia has repeatedly sent waves of drones and missiles to target Ukraine's civilian electricity grid, with Ukrainian authorities reporting that all of Ukraine's power plants have been attacked at one point or another since the full-scale invasion. This has led to rolling blackouts across the country, and more than 60% of the Ukrainian capital is currently without power, as the Ukrainian government has declared a state of emergency due to the energy crisis. The situation started reaching a critical point in early January, with Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko taking the unprecedented and controversial step of asking Kyiv residents to temporarily evacuate the city as Russia's bombardment escalated. Now, the mayor says 600,000 people have fled the city.
Before last attack, the population in our hometown was 3.6 million people. 600 people leave the city. Not everyone have a chance to leave the city, but right now the population is reduced.
600 people?
Around 600,000.
With temperatures routinely plunging as low as minus 15 degrees centigrade, many Ukrainian families are struggling just to heat their homes, as the blackouts have also impacted Ukraine's central heating network and running water. In response, Ukrainian authorities have set up heated tents in major population centres to provide warmth and shelter to civilians impacted by the blackouts. A Polish fundraiser to help Ukrainians dealing with the winter crisis has also received 1.2 million euros worth of donations so far.
This beautiful gestures of Polish citizens feeling sympathy, feeling responsibility towards our Ukrainian neighbors in the times of coldness. If you're lucky, and we are lucky in Poland, you can come back home and it's warm. You can make a warm meal for your children.
President Zelensky says Ukrainian repair crews are working round the clock to repair the damage.
Repair crews and the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, employees of energy companies and municipal services are fully engaged. As of this morning, about 4,000 buildings in Kyiv are still without heat and nearly 60% of the capital is without electricity. According to reports from city authorities, the resources involved are sufficient, but time is needed. I do not agree with this assessment. Additional measures and additional resources are needed.
But with Ukrainian intelligence agencies warning of further Russian attacks on energy infrastructure this winter, the task of restoring power to these embattled communities may only get harder. I'm Oz Kataji from Kyiv for TVP World.
Speaking to reporters in Davos, President Trump said he would talk to Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday. His envoy, Steve Witkoff, will travel to Moscow in a bid to revive the stalled peace process. In a blunt speech to world leaders, Canada's Prime Minister Mike Carney laid out how his country and other Western middle powers should deal with the disruption of the global order caused by America under Trump. Franciszek Pilis has the story.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney stole the show at the World Economic Forum in Davos with a blunt speech about how Western allies should react to the disruption caused by Donald Trump.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited.
In indirect response to Trump's threats against NATO allies over Greenland and new tariffs, as well as the rising influence of great powers such as China, Carney called for new realism and unity among what he called middle powers.
Argue the middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But I'd also say that great powers can afford for now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not.
Donald Trump, who had in the past argued Canada should become part of the United States just like Greenland, was not thrilled with the speech.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
The Canadian Prime Minister got a big cheer, however, from a man who is considering running for the post currently occupied by Donald Trump in 2028.
Yeah, it's time to buck up. It's time to get serious and stop being complicit. It's time to stand tall and firm, have a backbone.
Speaking to TVP World, Lord Jim O'Neill, former British Treasury Minister, said Carney's advice should be followed by European leaders in limiting dependence on the United States and greater engagement with China and other global South nations.
And Mark Carney, as the leader of Canada, is showing great rationality, in my opinion, that he is thinking what is in the interest of his country with this very strange era of his southern powerful neighbor and the remarkable economic importance of China to so many industries and businesses that are relevant to Canada. And that is exactly what every European leader should be thinking, in my opinion.
For TVP World, Franciszek Pilis.
24 narcotics labs shuttered, 85 people arrested, and 9 tons of synthetic drugs confiscated. Police in Poland and other European countries have just busted the biggest drug ring ever. Piotr Miszczuk investigates.
This is just part of what authorities seized in the EU's largest ever drug bust, a bust made possible thanks to transnational efforts.
All these activities, which lasted over 3 years in Poland, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic and Spain, resulted in the closure of a total of 24 drug labs, the seizure of over 1,000 tons of precursors, the arrest of 85 people and the seizure of 9.3 tons of synthetic drugs.
The drugs were produced from substances imported from Asia.
Mainly from China and India, various types of legal chemicals used in various areas, but primarily in the pharmaceutical industry, were imported into Western Europe.
The network's modus operandi aroused suspicion of the Polish services.
These chemicals were then transported to our country, repackaged, falsely labeled, and then distributed to locations where drug labs were established and synthetic drugs such as amphetamine, methadone, MDMA and other catenones were produced.
The network used Poland as its logistical hub for a reason, experts say.
Because we are the biggest producer of synthetic stimulants in not only European Union but whole Europe.
It was possible due to Poland's geographical location.
Poland lies at the intersection of many drug routes, including historical ones such as the Silk Road and the Balkan route, but also many of their branches that have emerged in the meantime.
Unlike in the past, Poland made synthetic drugs are now shipped not only to the west, but also notably to the Czech Republic, the Nordic countries and to the east, according to experts who stress that Poland's domestic market has boomed as well.
Poland is already a large market itself, and criminal groups are placing their assets here in order to supply the Polish market with narcotics.
Drugs have grown to become a serious issue in Poland, and the number of high-functioning addicts has risen.
Users just hide themselves, and I think that a lot of people from specialists jobs, managers, people with good jobs, with good amount of money, with higher education also use this drug.
For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
And now back to our main topic today. President Trump toned down his bellicose rhetoric about Greenland. To discuss the state of NATO and the Western Alliance, I'm joined by Gerlinde Nichus, former Deputy Director at NATO. Good evening, Gerlinde. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Good evening.
So President Trump appeared to back down today. He pleaded with Europe to let him have Greenland rather than threatening them with military action and tariffs. So is the worst over?
Well, that's still to see. I guess the announcement from Trump to not use military force was met with a big sigh of relief. But clearly, I mean, his demand for acquiring Greenland through instant negotiations is still there, and it remains as unfounded as it was before. Because the way he was framing it is that he said Greenland was part of the US during the Second World War, when in fact in that time it was the US took care of its security upon request of the Danish ambassador, but it retained its Danish sovereignty. He claimed that Trump claimed that Greenland is undefended when it's not part of the US, which is nonsense because clearly Greenland is part of NATO and as such part of NATO's collective defense and deterrence. And in that sense, he also claimed that he needs to own it, as a piece of property. So he was arguing on very false grounds that he needs Greenland, where in fact he could achieve what he claims he wants, namely a better security for the US and the allies. He could all achieve that through negotiations and the already existing treaty between the US and Denmark.
We saw some Republicans responding very negatively to Trump's latest outbursts on tariffs, on Greenland. Do you think that played a role in his shift of tone, if you will?
Well, look, that's pure speculation, but I guess the fact that he's now referring to the negotiation path is, if you wish, a positive development, yeah, because had he kept the threat of using military force on the table, that scenario would clearly have been much, much worse, yeah. But it still doesn't mean that we or NATO or the EU, for that matter, are out of the woods, because in many ways, this is just one piece of a broader rupture, as the Canadian Prime Minister rightly said. So we are dealing with a president who is infringing democracy, who doesn't appreciate democracy, who has been infringing on NATO collective defense Article 5. Even today in his speech, I mean, he simply apparently didn't know that it was NATO invoking Article 5 the first time in defense of the US after 9/11. So quite some level of ignorance there as well. He is cozying up with Russia. He is helping the aggressor. He is coercing the victim, Zelensky. So we still have on the NATO side a really existential crisis, and in many ways an alliance which is strategically paralyzed. Yeah, and that problem won't go away anytime soon.
You mentioned the Canadian Prime Minister Carney, but another Western leader, Alexander Stubb of Finland, in an interview with the Financial Times, said that when it comes to Greenland, diplomacy will ultimately prevail. Although he also admitted that this is probably the toughest situation he has experienced as a leader. So as a former NATO official, what do you think could be a solution there? What kind of diplomatic solution that could satisfy Trump and keep NATO intact could be offered?
Well, I think on the NATO side, there are a number of things NATO could do. They have now started talking about this Arctic sentry, which would send a good signal if they arrange that similar to the Eastern sentry as an activity, so not as a formal operation. They don't need to go through the formal consensus machinery. But then, of course, NATO could also do much more on, let's say, on high North and Arctic security, which admittedly in past decades has been considered, well, not a priority, also because the Arctic members of NATO always pushed back. They didn't want to have NATO in the Arctic on the grounds that they said this is an area of low tensions and we do not want to militarize it. So it were the same members who actually kept NATO from being there. But having said that, what NATO could do apart from the Arctic sentry I was referring to, clearly step up the range of exercises in the region. So to show to potential.
If I may interrupt you, and we're gradually winding down this program, but I wanted to ask you: is there something more political that can be done to allow President Trump to feel that he got something out of it, rather than just pure security arrangements?
Well, I would argue that if you say we are doing more training, we are doing an increased range of exercises, we are looking into increasing our Arctic capabilities, bearing in mind that the way how troops operate there, these are not only military messages, these are very concrete operational messages which should also resonate with somebody like Trump. So he could get the security he is asking for through NATO.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. This was World News Tonight, and stay on for my interview with Lord Jim O'Neill, the person who invented the term BRICS 20 years ago, and he predicted some of the things we're witnessing today, the shift in global power. Stay on with us. Thank you.